I was watching the blizzard warnings flash across my TV screen when my doorbell rang at 7 in the morning, and nothing good ever comes from unexpected visitors during a snowstorm that's supposed to dump 3 feet of snow on Buffalo, New York. I pulled on a sweatshirt and trudged to the front door, already knowing in my gut that this was going to be trouble. Standing on my porch was Patricia Henderson, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, bundled up in a designer parka that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her perfectly highlighted hair was somehow immune to the wind, and her lips were pressed into that thin line that every resident in our neighborhood had learned to dread. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, not waiting for an invitation before launching into her prepared speech. "I'm here on official HOA business regarding multiple violations we've documented at your property." I leaned against the doorframe, already exhausted, and she hadn't even started yet. "Patricia, there's a blizzard coming. Can this wait?" "The HOA doesn't stop for weather, Daniel," she said, pulling out a clipboard that she'd somehow kept dry despite the wind whipping snow around us. "First, your mailbox is 4 inches too far to the left according to neighborhood specifications. Second, the wreath on your door contains red berries, and the approved holiday decoration guidelines clearly state only white and gold ornaments are permitted. Third, your driveway was shoveled last week using a pattern that doesn't match the approved north-south clearing method." I stared at her, wondering if this was some kind of elaborate prank. "You're documenting my snow shoveling pattern. The HOA takes uniformity very seriously," Patricia said, making notes on her clipboard. "Each violation carries a $200 fine. That's $600 total, due within 15 days. "Patricia, I'm not paying $600 because you don't like how I shovel my driveway." Her eyes narrowed, and I recognized that look. It was the same expression she'd had when she'd fined the Richardsons for painting their shutters cream instead of eggshell white, and when she'd tried to force old Mr. Chen to remove his vegetable garden because it wasn't aesthetically cohesive with the neighborhood's vision. "The HOA bylaws are very clear," she said. "If you refuse to comply, we'll place a lien on your property. I've done it before and I'll do it again. This neighborhood has standards." I felt my jaw clench. I'd moved to Willowbrook Estates 3 years ago, right after my wife Amanda passed away from cancer. The house had been her dream, and I'd bought it partly to honor her memory and partly because I needed a fresh start. For the first year, Patricia had left me alone, probably out of some sense of decency. But once that grace period expired, she'd been relentless. Every minor deviation from her interpretation of the HOA rules resulted in fines, threatening letters, and surprise inspections. "I'll review the bylaws," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for the storm." "One more thing," Patricia said, and something in her tone made me look up. "I noticed you have a commercial-grade snowblower in your garage. The HOA regulations specify that all snow removal equipment must be stored out of sight in enclosed structures. Your garage door was open yesterday." I was working in there. "The door was open for 20 minutes. "That's still a violation," she said, making another note. "However, I'm willing to overlook it if you loan me that snowblower for the duration of the storm. My husband Bob is out of town, and our little electric model won't handle 3 feet of snow." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want to borrow my snowblower after you just hit me with $600 in fines? I'm offering you a way to reduce your penalties," Patricia said, as if she were doing me a favor. "Neighbors should help neighbors, Daniel. That's what community means." "Community goes both ways," I said. "And I'm using that snowblower myself. I've got a bad back and I'm not shoveling 3 feet of snow by hand. Patricia's face hardened. I see. Well, don't say I didn't give you an opportunity to be reasonable. Good luck with those fines, Mr. Jenkins. She turned and marched back to her house, which was directly across the street from mine. I watched her go, then closed the door and leaned against it, feeling my blood pressure slowly returning to normal. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my business partner, Marcus Wu. Storm's hitting hard. You ready for the chaos? I smiled despite my irritation. Marcus didn't know how accurate that message was. I texted back, always am. How's the crew looking? Everyone's on standby. We're going to make a fortune this week. Marcus and I owned Alpine Snow Services, the largest commercial snow removal company in the Buffalo area. We'd started it 8 years ago when I was still working as a civil engineer and needed a side business. After Amanda died, I'd thrown myself into the work, and the company had exploded. We now had 47 trucks, 36 full-time employees, and contracts with every major business park, shopping center, and residential community within 50 miles, including Willowbrook Estates. That was the delicious irony that Patricia Henderson had no idea about. The HOA had signed a 5-year contract with Alpine Snow Services 3 years ago, right before I'd moved into the neighborhood. Patricia had been bragging about the deal at a community meeting I'd attended, talking about how she'd negotiated a rock-bottom price for premium service. What she didn't know was that I was the anonymous LLC owner behind Alpine. I kept a low profile intentionally, letting Marcus handle the public-facing aspects of the business, while I managed operations and finances from behind the scenes. I'd never mentioned my ownership to anyone in Willowbrook Estates. It wasn't a secret exactly, but I valued my privacy. After Amanda's death, I discovered that I preferred staying out of the spotlight. Let people think I was just some guy who worked from home doing engineering consultations. The reality was that Alpine grossed about $12 million annually, and I was very, very good at what I did. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey man, we've got a situation," he said. "I just got off the phone with that nightmare HOA president from Willowbrook, Patricia something." "Henderson," I said. "What did she want?" "She's demanding we prioritize her personal driveway before we do the community streets. Says it's an emergency because her husband is away and she needs to be able to get out first thing tomorrow morning." I told her that's not how our contract works, but she threatened to report us to the Better Business Bureau for breach of contract. I walked to my window and looked out at Patricia's house. She was visible in her front window, phone pressed to her ear, probably still talking to Marcus. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her I'd talk to my partner and get back to her," Marcus said. "But between you and me, this lady is insane. She's called our office 6 times in the last month complaining about tire tracks in the snow and demanding we use specific plowing patterns. I'm ready to drop this contract when it's up for renewal." "Don't do anything yet," I said. "I'll handle Patricia Henderson. You know her, she's my neighbor, and trust me, I know exactly how to deal with her." We talked for a few more minutes about logistics for the storm. The first bands of heavy snow were expected to hit around noon, with the worst of it arriving overnight. Our crews would start their routes at 2 a.m., hitting the commercial properties first, then moving to the residential contracts. Willowbrook Estates was scheduled for a 6 a.m. start time, which was actually generous considering some neighborhoods wouldn't get plowed until midday. After I hung up with Marcus, I spent the next few hours preparing. I brought in extra firewood, checked my generator, and made sure I had enough food and water to last a week if necessary. Buffalo winters were no joke, and this storm was shaping up to be a monster. The meteorologists were calling it a once-in-a-decade event, with blizzard conditions expected to last 36 hours around 11 a.m. I headed out to my garage to do some final prep work. My snowblower was a beast, a professional-grade Arians model with a 32-inch clearing width and enough power to chew through waist-deep snow. I'd bought it after my first winter in Buffalo, when I'd learned the hard way that the cheap consumer models couldn't handle the lake-effect snow that routinely buried the city. I was in the garage checking the oil when I heard footsteps outside. I looked up to see Patricia's husband Bob walking up my driveway. That was odd. Marcus had said Bob was out of town, and Patricia had told me the same thing that morning. "Hey, Daniel," Bob said, looking uncomfortable. "Patricia sent me over. She said you had a disagreement this morning." "I didn't realize you were back in town," I said carefully. Bob shifted his weight. "I'm not really. I mean, I'm here now, but I'm supposed to be at a conference in Rochester. Patricia called me and said it was an emergency, that I needed to come home before the storm hit." "An emergency?" "She said our snowblower broke and she needed me to borrow yours," Bob said. He looked embarrassed. "Look, I know Patricia can be intense about neighborhood stuff. I told her we could just hire someone to plow our driveway if our machine isn't working, but she insisted I drive back through pre-storm traffic to handle this personally." I felt bad for Bob. He was a decent guy, a software engineer who worked long hours and generally stayed out of HOA politics. From what I could tell, he spent most of his time trying to smooth over Patricia's messes and apologizing to the neighbors she'd alienated. "Your snowblower is broken?" I asked. "That's what Patricia said. Honestly, I haven't even checked yet. She called me 3 hours ago and I've been driving ever since." "Why don't you go check your snowblower?" I suggested. "If it's actually broken, come back and we'll figure something out." Bob nodded gratefully and headed back across the street. I watched him go, wondering what Patricia's angle was. She told me Bob was out of town, presumably to strengthen her case for borrowing my equipment. But then she'd called him home anyway, which suggested the snowblower excuse was fabricated. Was she really that desperate to control every situation, even when it meant lying to her own husband? I didn't have to wait long for an answer. 10 minutes later, I saw Bob and Patricia standing in their driveway, clearly arguing. I couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear. Bob was gesturing at their garage while Patricia pointed at my house. Finally, Bob threw up his hands and went inside, leaving Patricia alone in the driveway. She stood there for a moment, then turned and marched straight toward my garage. "Daniel," she called out, "I need to speak with you." I put down the oil can and walked to the garage door. "What can I do for you, Patricia?" "Bob says our snowblower is working fine," she said, and I noticed she didn't sound embarrassed or apologetic. If anything, she sounded annoyed. "But it's insufficient for a storm of this magnitude. I need a commercial-grade machine, and you have one sitting right here. As HOA president, I'm formally requesting the use of your equipment for community safety purposes." "Community safety purposes," I repeated. "That's correct. The HOA bylaws include provisions for emergency resource sharing. Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection B." I'd read the bylaws cover to cover after Patricia's harassment started, looking for ways to protect myself. I knew exactly what section she was referencing, and she was twisting its meaning beyond recognition. "That section covers emergency situations where community infrastructure is at risk," I said. "It doesn't give you the right to requisition personal property for your private driveway. I'm the HOA president. My ability to move freely during an emergency is essential to community welfare." "The snowplow service will have the streets cleared by morning," I said. "You'll be able to move freely then." Patricia's face flushed red. I've already called Alpine Snow Services to prioritize my property, and they were extremely rude and uncooperative. If they won't provide adequate service, then I have no choice but to utilize available neighborhood resources. My snowblower isn't a neighborhood resource. It's my personal property and I'm going to need it. Fine, Patricia said coldly. Then I'll add refusal to cooperate during a community emergency to your list of violations. That's another $500. Plus, I'll be calling an emergency HOA board meeting to discuss your continued residency in Willowbrook Estates. She turned and walked away before I could respond. I stood there watching her go, feeling anger burn in my chest. The threat about my residency was probably empty. You couldn't just kick someone out of their home because they wouldn't loan you their snowblower. But Patricia had proven over the years that she was willing to make people's lives miserable through constant fines, harassment, and legal threats. She'd driven out 3 families that I knew of, all of whom had sold their homes just to escape her tyranny. The snow started falling around noon, light flurries at first that quickly intensified into heavy, wet flakes. I spent the afternoon inside, working on my laptop and monitoring weather updates. By 4 p.m., we already had 6 inches on the ground and visibility was dropping fast. By 6 p.m., the wind had picked up and the snow was falling so hard I couldn't see Patricia's house across the street. I made myself dinner and settled in to watch the storm. There was something mesmerizing about blizzards, the way they transformed the familiar world into an alien landscape. Streets disappeared under white drifts. Cars became mysterious mounds. The wind created patterns and sculptures that shifted and changed from moment to moment. Around 8 p.m., my power flickered but stayed on. I checked my phone and saw messages from neighbors asking if anyone had lost electricity. The community text chain was active with people sharing updates and offers of help. It was one of the few nice things about Willowbrook Estates, the way people generally looked out for each other. Except Patricia, of course. She'd sent 3 messages to the chain, all of them complaints. The first demanded to know why Alpine Snow Services wasn't already plowing despite the ongoing blizzard. The second threatened legal action against the HOA board for signing an inadequate contract with the snow removal company. The third was a list of violations she'd observed before the storm started, complete with addresses and fine amounts. Several people had responded to her messages with increasingly annoyed tones. Someone pointed out that no plow service operates during active blizzards because it's dangerous and inefficient. Someone else mentioned that Patricia herself had negotiated the Alpine contract and had bragged about it extensively. A third person, bless them, replied with a simple, "Maybe focus on staying safe instead of harassing neighbors during a natural disaster." Patricia's response was swift and cutting. As HOA president, I have a responsibility to maintain standards regardless of weather conditions. If you don't appreciate my dedication to our community's property values, perhaps you should consider relocating. I turned off my phone after that, not wanting to watch the inevitable argument unfold. I knew Patricia thrived on conflict, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of jumping into the fray. The storm raged all night. I woke up several times to the sound of the wind howling like a living thing. Each time, I'd look out the window to see nothing but white chaos. The snow was falling horizontally now, driven by winds that had to be hitting 50 or 60 miles per hour. This wasn't just a snowstorm. It was a full-scale blizzard, the kind that shut down entire cities. Around 2 a.m., I got a text from Marcus, holding crews back, conditions too dangerous. We'll reassess at 6. I sent back a thumbs up. It was the right call. Our trucks were tough, but they weren't invincible. No amount of money was worth risking our drivers' lives. I must have fallen asleep around 3 because I woke with a start at 5:30 to the sound of something loud near my house. For a moment, I thought a tree had fallen. Then I heard an engine revving, and I realized the sound was coming from my garage. I grabbed my robe and ran downstairs, my mind racing. Had someone broken in? Was my truck being stolen? I burst through the door that connected my house to the garage and flipped on the lights. The garage door was open, letting in a wall of blowing snow and frigid air. My snowblower was gone. In the space where it had been sitting, there were drag marks in the thin layer of snow that had blown into the garage. Someone had stolen my snowblower. I stood there in shock for a moment, then ran to the open garage door. The wind hit me like a physical force, and the cold was so intense it took my breath away. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me, but I could hear an engine running somewhere nearby. I grabbed my heavy coat from the hook and pulled on my boots, then stepped out into the blizzard. The snow was nearly 3 feet deep already, with drifts that reached past my knees. I struggled forward, following the sound of the engine. As I got closer to the street, I saw lights and a figure pushing my snowblower down the sidewalk. It was Patricia. She was bundled up in what looked like full Arctic expedition gear, and she was methodically clearing a path from her driveway to the street. My snowblower, the one she'd demanded to borrow and that I'd explicitly refused to loan her, was throwing a perfect arc of snow into the howling wind. "Patricia," I shouted, but my voice was torn away by the wind. I struggled through the snow toward her, my anger overriding the cold. "Patricia." She must have heard me because she turned, her face barely visible behind a scarf and goggles. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then she turned back to her work and continued blowing snow as if I wasn't there. I reached her and grabbed her arm. She jerked away and shut off the snowblower, finally acknowledging my presence. "You stole my snowblower," I shouted over the wind. "I borrowed it," Patricia yelled back. "Under the emergency provisions of the HOA bylaws, I left a note on your workbench. You broke into my garage and took my property without permission. That's theft. Your garage door was unlocked. You should be more careful about security. And as I explained yesterday, I have the authority to utilize community resources during emergencies." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She'd actually broken into my garage in the middle of a blizzard to steal my snowblower, and she was acting like it was a perfectly reasonable thing to do. "Give it back right now, or I'm calling the police," I said. Patricia pulled down her scarf, and I saw her smile. It was a cold, triumphant expression that made my blood boil. "Go ahead and call them," she said. "They're not going to come out in this weather for a dispute between neighbors. And by the time the storm clears and they can respond, I'll have this entire street cleared, which will demonstrate that I was acting in the community's best interest. No prosecutor would charge me under these circumstances." She was probably right, and that made it worse. The Buffalo Police Department was going to be slammed with actual emergencies during a blizzard like this. They weren't going to prioritize a stolen snowblower, especially when the thief was using it for snow removal. "I need that snowblower," I said, trying a different approach. "I have a bad back. I can't shovel this much snow by hand." "Should have thought of that before you refused to be a team player," Patricia said. She pulled her scarf back up. "I'll return it when I'm finished, probably around noon." She yanked the starter cord and the engine roared back to life. Then she turned back to her work, dismissing me completely. I stood there for another moment, shaking with cold and fury. Then I turned and struggled back to my house through the knee-deep snow. My hands were already numb, and I could feel the cold settling deep into my bones. Inside, I peeled off my wet coat and boots and tried to think clearly. Patricia had really done it this time. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The fines, the harassment, the constant threats, all of that had been infuriating but technically within her authority as HOA president. But this was actual theft, regardless of how she tried to justify it with twisted interpretations of the bylaws. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, watching the sky slowly lighten outside. The snow was still falling hard, and I could see Patricia moving back and forth across the street, methodically clearing not just her driveway but her entire walkway, her sidewalk, and even a path to her mailbox. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Morning," I said, my voice rough. "You sound terrible." "Everything okay?" "Define okay," I said, and told him about the snowblower theft. Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Are you kidding me? She actually broke into your garage and stole your equipment. She's using it right now. I can see her from my window. Call the cops, man." "That's theft. She's right that they won't respond during the blizzard. And even after, it's going to be hard to press charges when she'll argue she was helping the community. So what are you going to do?" I watched Patricia clear another section of sidewalk, and an idea started forming in my mind. It wasn't nice, but Patricia had just demonstrated that she didn't believe normal rules applied to her. Maybe it was time she learned otherwise. "What time are we starting our Willowbrook Estates route?" I asked. Weather's starting to clear. I was going to have crews there by 8 a.m. "Why? Change of plans," I said. "I want Willowbrook pushed to the end of the schedule. Last community we service." There was a pause. "Daniel, that violates our contract. We guaranteed them service by 8 a.m. on the morning after snowfall ends. The contract says 8 a.m. after snowfall ends, or as soon as conditions safely permit, whichever is later. This storm is still going. We have legitimate safety concerns about operating in these conditions. The storm's breaking up. We can operate safely by 8. But Patricia doesn't know that," I said. "Marcus, I want Alpine Snow Services to be completely unresponsive to Willowbrook Estates today. Don't answer their calls. Don't reply to emails. Let them sit in 3 feet of snow and wonder when we're going to show up." Marcus was quiet again. Then he said, "This is about more than the snowblower, isn't it?" "She's been making my life hell for 2 years," I said. "She's driven good people out of this neighborhood with her harassment and power trips. And now she's committed an actual crime and thinks she's going to get away with it because she's HOA president. I'm done playing nice." "Okay," Marcus said slowly. "I can delay the Willowbrook service until this evening, but if they threaten legal action, I'm going to have to respond. I can't put the whole company at risk. They won't sue. The contract has enough flexibility that we can claim weather-related delays. Just trust me on this." "You're the boss," Marcus said. "Literally, but I hope you know what you're doing." After we hung up, I spent the next hour watching Patricia work. She'd moved beyond her own property now and was clearing the sidewalk in front of the house next to hers, which belonged to an elderly couple named the Harrisons. That would have been admirable if I didn't know her real motivation. She wasn't helping out of kindness. She was demonstrating to the neighborhood what a devoted community leader she was, all while using equipment she'd stolen from my garage. Round 7:30 a.m. The snow finally started to taper off. The wind was still strong, but the heavy snowfall had ended. I could see more than a block now, and the view was staggering. Snow had drifted up to the windows of parked cars. Tree branches sagged under white weight. The street was completely impassable, buried under several feet of undisturbed powder. My phone started buzzing with messages from the neighborhood text chain. People were waking up and assessing the damage. Someone reported that their fence had collapsed. Someone else had lost power overnight. There were questions about when the streets would be plowed, when mail service would resume, when life would return to normal. Patricia, naturally, had appointed herself the coordinator of all information. She posted a long message explaining that she'd been in contact with Alpine Snow Services, and that they'd promised to have the neighborhood cleared within 2 hours. She reminded everyone to clear their sidewalks according to HOA specifications, and warned that storm-related damage didn't excuse violations of community standards. I smiled at that message, because I knew what was coming. 8 a.m. came and went with no sign of Alpine's trucks. By 8:30, Patricia posted another message saying there had been a slight delay, but service was imminent. By 9, someone else posted asking if anyone had been able to reach Alpine's office because they'd been calling for an hour with no answer. I put on fresh coffee and made myself breakfast, occasionally glancing out the window at Patricia's house. Around 9:30, I saw her come outside and stare down the street, clearly looking for plow trucks that weren't coming. She pulled out her phone and made a call, pacing in her cleared driveway while she talked. My phone rang 10 minutes later. It was Marcus, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Your HOA president has called our office 14 times in the last hour," he said. "The voicemails are getting increasingly unhinged. The last one threatened to sue us for breach of contract, negligence, and something she called community endangerment." "Let her leave messages," I said. "How are the other routes going? We're crushing it. Every commercial property is clear, and we're moving through the residential contracts ahead of schedule. We'll actually have time to pick up someone off jobs this afternoon, make some extra money." "Perfect. Let's keep Willowbrook scheduled for last. I want them sitting in snow until at least 6 p.m. "You're cold, man," Marcus said, but he was laughing. "I like it." The morning dragged on. More neighbors posted to the text chain asking about the plows. Patricia kept insisting that service was coming, that there were just delays due to the volume of snow, that everyone needed to be patient. But I could tell she was starting to panic. Her messages became shorter and more defensive. Around 11 a.m., I saw Patricia trudging through the snow to my house. She was still wearing her expedition gear, and she had my snowblower. For a moment, I thought she was going to do the right thing and return it with an apology. Then I opened the door and saw her face. "Your snowblower is out of gas," she announced, as if this were my fault. "I need you to refuel it so I can finish clearing the neighborhood." "Finish clearing the neighborhood," I repeated. "Patricia, you stole my property. You don't get to demand I help you use it more efficiently." "I'm trying to help everyone," she said, and I was amazed that she actually sounded self-righteous. "The Plow service has abandoned us. Someone has to take action, and as usual, I'm the only one willing to step up. So either give me gas for this machine, or people are going to be trapped in their homes, and it will be your fault." I felt my temper, which I'd been carefully controlling all morning, finally snap. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "Excuse me," I said, "get off my property. Take my snowblower back to your house, leave it in my garage where you found it, and get off my property before I call the police and press charges for theft." Patricia's face went red. "You can't speak to me like that. I'm the HOA president." "I don't care if you're the president of the United States. You committed a crime, and you're standing here demanding I help you compound it. You have 60 seconds to return my equipment before I make that call." For a moment, I thought she was going to argue further. Then something in my expression must have convinced her I was serious. She grabbed the snowblower's handle and started pushing it toward my garage, struggling through the deep snow. I watched from my doorway as she wrestled it inside and left it roughly where it had been. Then she turned and pointed at me. "This isn't over," she said. "I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night. We're going to discuss your violations, your refusal to cooperate during an emergency, and whether someone with your attitude belongs in this community." "Looking forward to it," I said and closed the door. I immediately went to my garage to check the snowblower. As Patricia had said, it was out of gas. But more concerning, it looked like it had been run hard. The paint was scratched in several places, and there was a dent in the housing that definitely hadn't been there before. I took several photos with my phone, documenting the damage. Then I refueled the machine and spent the next 3 hours clearing my own driveway and walkway. The snow was heavy and wet, and even with the powerful snowblower, it was exhausting work. My back was screaming by the time I finished, and I had to take several breaks to rest. But there was something satisfying about it too, about reclaiming my property and my space. The neighborhood text chain continued to blow up throughout the afternoon. By 2 p.m., people were getting genuinely worried. Several residents had medical appointments they couldn't get to. Someone's elderly mother needed medication that couldn't be delivered. A couple was supposed to fly out for a funeral, but couldn't get to the airport. Patricia posted regular updates, each one promising that alpine snow services would arrive any minute now, and making excuses for the delay. But I could tell people were starting to turn on her. Several messages pointed out that she was the one who had negotiated the alpine contract, and maybe she should have chosen a more reliable company. Someone else noted that she'd been bragging for years about what a good deal she'd gotten, and perhaps you get what you pay for. Around 4 p.m., I got a call from Bob Henderson. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Daniel, it's Bob," he said, sounding exhausted. "Look, I need to apologize for Patricia taking your snowblower this morning. I didn't know she'd done it until after the fact, and I told her it was completely out of line." "I appreciate that, Bob," I said carefully. "She's under a lot of stress with this HOA stuff," he continued. "I know that doesn't excuse what she did, but she really does think she's acting in the neighborhood's best interest. She just has trouble seeing other perspectives sometimes. Bob, she broke into my garage and stole my property. That's not a perspective issue, that's a crime." I know. "Listen, are you planning to press charges? Because if you are, I need to know so I can get her a lawyer." I thought about that. Did I want to press charges? Part of me did, just to teach Patricia a lesson about consequences. But another part of me knew it would be messy and complicated, and I'd probably end up looking like the bad guy who prosecuted his neighbor over a borrowed snowblower. "I haven't decided yet," I said honestly. "I want to see how the HOA meeting goes tomorrow." "About that," Bob said, and I heard him sigh. "Patricia's planning to come at you hard. She's been on the phone all day with the other board members, building a case for maximum fines and possible foreclosure proceedings. I've tried to talk her down, but she's convinced you're some kind of threat to the community. Foreclosure proceedings. Bob, you can't foreclose on someone's house because they wouldn't loan out their snowblower. I know that. You know that. Patricia thinks the cumulative violations and what she's calling refusal to participate in community welfare gives her the authority. I don't think it would hold up legally, but she's determined to try." I thanked Bob for the heads up and ended the call. Then I sat at my kitchen table and thought about my options. I could show up at the HOA meeting and defend myself against Patricia's absurd accusations. I could fight her in court if she actually tried to follow through on foreclosure. I could press charges for the theft and let the legal system handle it, or I could end this my way. I called Marcus back. "Change of plans," I said. "I want our cruise at Willowbrook Estates at 6 a.m. tomorrow, not tonight. Daniel, that's pushing it." We're already stretching the contract language. If we delay any longer, they'll have legitimate grounds for a lawsuit. One more day, I said. And tomorrow morning, I want you to come with the crew. There's something I need to do, and I need you there to back me up. This is about the HOA meeting, isn't it? Maybe. Just trust me. Can you do it? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what? Yeah, I can do it. This Patricia woman has been making my life miserable for months with her ridiculous demands. I'd like to see someone take her down a peg." "Good," I said. "Meet me at my house at 5:30 a.m. and Marcus, bring the contract file, the complete one with all the correspondence and documentation. Planning something big. Just a little demonstration about community standards and who really controls what around here." That evening, the neighborhood text chain reached a fever pitch. Still no plows had arrived, and people were running out of patience. Several residents posted angry messages demanding to know what was going on. Others shared stories about missed work, canceled plans, and general frustration. A few people tried to defend Patricia, noting that the storm was unprecedented and delays were understandable. But most of the anger was directed at Alpine Snow Services and, by extension, at Patricia for choosing them. Someone posted a scathing review they'd left on Alpine's website. Someone else suggested the HOA should break the contract and find a new company. A third person started researching other snow removal services in the Buffalo area. Patricia tried to maintain control of the narrative, posting long explanations about contract terms and service expectations. But her messages had a desperate quality now. She promised that she would personally drive to Alpine's office first thing in the morning to demand answers. She assured everyone that she would not rest until the situation was resolved. She reminded people that she'd been working tirelessly for the community's benefit, even clearing sidewalks by hand while others sat inside complaining. That last comment didn't go over well. Someone pointed out that most people didn't have commercial-grade snowblowers to work with. Someone else noted that Patricia had been focusing on her own property and immediate area, while the rest of the neighborhood remained buried. The conversation was turning ugly, and I could sense the neighborhood's unity fracturing under the pressure. I went to bed around 10, setting my alarm for 5 a.m. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. When my alarm went off, it was still dark outside. I got up and made strong coffee, then dressed in warm layers and headed to the garage. My snowblower was where I'd left it, refueled and ready. I checked it over one more time, noting the new scratches and dents, more evidence of Patricia's borrowing. Marcus arrived right on time, parking his Alpine Snow Services truck in my driveway. He was bundled up against the cold, breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Morning," he said. "I brought everything you asked for. Now are you going to tell me what we're doing?" "In a bit," I said. "Where are the crews?" "Staged at the neighborhood entrance waiting for the go signal. I told them 6 a.m., like you said." "Perfect. Come inside for a minute." We went into my kitchen, and I poured Marcus a cup of coffee. Then I pulled up the neighborhood text chain on my phone and showed him the messages from the past 24 hours. "Wow," he said, scrolling through the increasingly angry posts. "They're really turning on this Patricia woman." "She's been the HOA tyrant for years," I explained. "Most people are afraid of her because she has the power to fine them or make their lives difficult. But this situation has exposed her limitations. She couldn't deliver on her promises about the Plow service, and now people are questioning whether she's as competent as she claims. And you deliberately created this situation by having me delay our service," Marcus said. He wasn't judging, just stating a fact. "I did," I admitted. "Patricia has hurt a lot of people with her power trips and arbitrary enforcement of rules. She needed to face some consequences, and this seemed like poetic justice given that she literally stole my snowblower to try to save face. Marcus nodded slowly. So what's the end game here? We can't just leave the neighborhood buried forever. We have a contract. We're going to fulfill that contract in about 30 minutes, I said. But first, there's something I need to do. At 5:45 a.m., I walked across the street to Patricia's house and knocked on her door. It took a minute, but eventually she answered, looking haggard. She was already dressed, probably preparing for her promised trip to Alpine's office. "What do you want?" she demanded. "I wanted to give you a heads up," I said. "Alpine Snow Services is going to be here in 15 minutes to plow the neighborhood." Her expression shifted from hostility to relief to suspicion in rapid succession. "How do you know that?" "Because I called them," I said. "Or more accurately, I told them to come." "You told them?" "What are you talking about, Patricia? Do you know who owns Alpine Snow Services?" She stared at me blankly. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Alpine is owned by a private LLC," I said. "The ownership information isn't public and we like to keep a low profile." "But the company was founded 8 years ago by 2 partners. One of them is Marcus Wu, who handles public relations and day-to-day operations. The other is me." I watched the words sink in. Patricia's face went through several emotions: confusion, disbelief, understanding, and finally anger. "You," she said flatly. "Me," I confirmed. "I own the company you've been calling and threatening for the past 24 hours. The company you accused of breach of contract, negligence, and community endangerment. The company whose employees you've harassed for months with ridiculous demands about plowing patterns and tire tracks. You deliberately delayed service to this neighborhood," Patricia said, her voice rising. "You left people stranded because of a personal grudge." "I delayed service because weather conditions made it unsafe to operate, which is clearly specified in the contract as a legitimate reason for postponement. Every other community we service understood that and was patient. But you, Patricia, you couldn't handle not being in control. You stole my personal property, damaged it, and then demanded I help you use it more, all while claiming to act in the community's best interest. I was trying to help people. You were trying to maintain your image as the neighborhood savior," I corrected. "And in the process, you committed theft, trespassing, and possibly several other crimes I could press charges for if I wanted to." Patricia's hands clenched into fists. "I could sue you. This is a conflict of interest. The HOA hired your company without knowing you lived here." "The HOA hired my company 3 months before I moved to this neighborhood," I said. "At the time, I wasn't a resident, so there was no conflict. And even after I moved in, I didn't interfere with the contract or service in any way. In fact, you've been getting excellent service at below market rates for 3 years. I could have raised your prices or dropped the contract when you started harassing me, but I didn't. I kept providing professional service despite your personal attacks." "This is unethical," Patricia sputtered. "The board needs to know about this." "I agree," I said. "Which is why I'm planning to attend tonight's HOA meeting and make a full disclosure. I'm going to tell everyone exactly who I am, what I do, and how much money this community has saved by having me as a neighbor instead of an enemy. And then, I'm going to show them documentation of every unreasonable demand you've made to my company over the past 6 months, including recordings of your threatening phone calls." Patricia's face had gone pale. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare embarrass me like that in front of the whole neighborhood." "Try me," I said. "You wanted to play hardball, Patricia. You wanted to threaten foreclosure and maximum fines and question my right to live here. Well, now we're playing, and I have a lot more ammunition than you do." I turned and walked back to my house, leaving her standing in her doorway. Marcus was waiting in my kitchen, and he gave me a curious look. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I said. "Let's get those plows moving." At exactly 6 a.m., 3 Alpine Snow Services trucks rolled into Willowbrook Estates. The sight of them caused an immediate flurry of activity on the neighborhood text chain. People posted celebratory messages, relief obvious in every word. Several residents came out of their houses to watch the plows work, waving at the drivers like they were conquering heroes. Patricia posted a terse message taking credit for the plow's arrival, claiming her persistent calls had finally gotten through to the incompetent management at Alpine. I didn't bother responding. The truth would come out soon enough. The crews were efficient and thorough, clearing the main streets first and then working their way through the side roads and cul-de-sacs. By 8 a.m., every street in Willowbrook Estates was passable. By 9, the subdivision looked almost normal, with neat piles of snow pushed to the sides and clear pavement visible everywhere. I spent the day preparing for the evening's HOA meeting. Marcus helped me compile documentation. The original contract, email chains showing Patricia's demands and threats, recordings of her phone calls to the office, and a detailed timeline of the past 24 hours. We also prepared a financial breakdown showing exactly how much money the neighborhood had saved by having Alpine services at a friends and family rate instead of standard commercial pricing. "This is pretty damning," Marcus said, reviewing the materials. "Are you sure you want to go scorched earth like this? There's no coming back from public humiliation." "Patricia has been publicly humiliating people for years," I said. "The Richardsons, the Chens, old Mr. Davidson who she forced out over his lawn gnome collection. Not to mention all the small daily humiliations she inflicts with her petty fines and power trips. Someone needs to stand up to her, and I'm in a unique position to do it. Just don't forget that you still have to live here after this is over," Marcus warned. "Neighborhoods have long memories." "I'm counting on it," I said. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that served as a gathering space for events. I arrived at 6:55, carrying a folder of documents and a laptop. The room was already packed. Apparently word had spread that tonight's meeting was going to be dramatic. Patricia was at the front of the room, conferring with the other board members. Teresa Mallory, the treasurer, Frank Davidson, the secretary, and Helen Porter, the vice president. They all looked uncomfortable, shooting glances at me as I took a seat in the back row. At exactly 7 p.m., Patricia called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice carrying that authoritative tone she used for official business. "I know the past few days have been challenging for everyone. The storm was unprecedented, and unfortunately, our snow removal service failed to live up to their contractual obligations. However, due to my persistent efforts, we did eventually receive service, and I'm currently exploring options for holding Alpine Snow Services accountable for their delays." Several people nodded, but I noticed a fair number of skeptical expressions too. The anger from the text chain hadn't completely dissipated. "Tonight's agenda includes several important items," Patricia continued. "But first, we need to address a serious situation involving resident violations and refusal to cooperate during the community emergency. Daniel Jenkins, would you please stand?" I stood up, and every head in the room turned to look at me. "Mr. Jenkins has accumulated over $1,000 in HOA violations over the past several weeks," Patricia announced. "These include improper mailbox placement, unauthorized holiday decorations, non-standard snow removal patterns, and storage violations. Additionally, during yesterday's emergency situation, Mr. Jenkins refused to loan community equipment when requested under the emergency provisions of our bylaws. "Community equipment?" I asked, my voice calm. "You mean my personal snowblower that you stole from my garage?" There was a collective gasp from the audience. Patricia's face flushed red. "I did not steal anything," she said coldly. "I utilized available resources under emergency authority granted to the HOA president. I left appropriate notification, and the equipment was returned promptly." "After I confronted you and threatened to call the police," I said, "and only after you damaged it and run it out of gas." "That's a lie. I have photos," I said, pulling out my phone. "Time-stamped photos showing the damage that wasn't there before you took it. I also have video from my garage security camera showing you entering my property at 5:40 a.m. without permission and removing my equipment." The room erupted in conversation. Patricia banged her gavel, trying to restore order. "Regardless of the details," she said loudly, "the point is that Mr. Jenkins has demonstrated a pattern of non-cooperation and hostility toward community standards. The board has discussed this situation extensively, and we believe that someone who cannot follow basic rules and contribute to neighborhood welfare should not continue residing in Willowbrook Estates. Therefore, I'm making a motion to begin foreclosure proceedings based on cumulative violations and failure to maintain community standards." The room went silent. Even the other board members looked shocked. Frank Davidson raised his hand tentatively. "Patricia, I don't think we actually have the authority to foreclose for these reasons," he said. "The violations you're describing are minor, and the snowblower situation is more of a personal dispute than a legitimate HOA matter." "I am the president of this board," Patricia said, her voice tight with anger. "And I'm telling you that we have both the authority and the obligation to maintain standards. If you're not willing to support strong leadership, perhaps you should reconsider your position on this board." "Actually," I said, standing up again, "before you continue down this path, there's something everyone should know. Patricia, you've spent the past day complaining about Alpine Snow Services and their allegedly poor performance. You've accused them of breach of contract and threatened legal action. You've told the neighborhood that you're going to find a better company to service our community." "That's correct," Patricia said. "We deserve reliable service, and Alpine has proven they can't provide it." "Here's the thing," I said. "Alpine Snow Services is owned by a private LLC. The company was founded 8 years ago by Marcus Wu and myself. I am 50% owner and managing partner of the company you've been threatening to sue." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see people processing the information, connecting dots, realizing implications. Patricia's face had gone from red to white. "That's impossible," she finally said. "You're an engineer. You work from home." "I am an engineer," I agreed. "I also own and operate the largest commercial snow removal company in the Buffalo area. Alpine currently services 47 major clients, including 12 residential communities. Willowbrook Estates is one of our smallest contracts, but we've provided excellent service for 3 years at below-market rates." I opened my laptop and pulled up the first slide of the presentation I'd prepared. "This is the standard rate Alpine charges for a community of this size and scope," I said, displaying the numbers on the screen I'd connected to. "This is the rate Willowbrook Estates pays. As you can see, you've been getting a discount of approximately 30%, which over 3 years amounts to over $40,000 in savings." Murmurs ran through the crowd. People were pulling out phones, probably calculating their individual savings. The reason for this discount, I continued, is that I live here. I have a personal stake in this community and I wanted to provide good service at a fair price. However, that hasn't stopped Patricia from making increasingly unreasonable demands of my company. I advanced to the next slide, which showed a timeline of Patricia's calls and emails to Alpine. In the past 6 months alone, Patricia has contacted our office 73 times with complaints and demands. These include requiring our drivers to plow in specific patterns that aren't part of the contract, demanding same-day service for minor snowfalls that don't meet the contract threshold, and insisting that her personal driveway be prioritized ahead of community streets. I played a recording of one of Patricia's more aggressive voicemails. Her voice filled the room, shrill and demanding. "This is completely unacceptable. I am the HOA president, and when I call, you need to respond immediately. If I don't hear back within the hour, I'm reporting you to the Better Business Bureau and every consumer protection agency in New York State." People in the audience shifted uncomfortably. This was not a good look for their HOA president. "Now, about the storm delay," I said. "Patricia has accused Alpine of breach of contract for not plowing during the blizzard. Let me be very clear. No reputable snow removal company operates during active blizzard conditions. It's dangerous for our drivers and inefficient for our clients, since snow immediately covers any cleared areas. Our contract explicitly states that service will be provided after snowfall ends or when conditions safely permit." I showed the relevant contract language on screen. "We delayed service to Willowbrook by approximately 12 hours beyond our normal response time," I admitted. "This was partially due to the unprecedented volume of snow requiring extra time to clear our priority clients, and partially because I wanted to make a point. Patricia stole my personal property, damaged it, and then demanded I help her continue using it. She threatened me with foreclosure for refusing to loan her my equipment. She has spent 2 years harassing me with petty fines and violations for minor deviations from her interpretation of HOA rules." I looked directly at Patricia, who was gripping the podium so hard her knuckles were white. "I'm not a perfect neighbor," I said. "My mailbox might be 4 inches off. I might have red berries on my wreath. But I've been paying my HOA dues on time, maintaining my property, and providing this community with excellent snow removal service at a steep discount. And I've done all of that while Patricia has been actively trying to make my life miserable." I closed my laptop and picked up the folder of documents. "So here's what's going to happen," I said. "Patricia is going to withdraw her motion for foreclosure and dismiss all the bogus fines she's levied against me. She's going to issue a formal apology for taking my property without permission. And she's going to stop using her position as HOA president to harass residents who don't meet her arbitrary standards. And if I refuse," Patricia said, her voice shaking with rage, "then Alpine Snow Services will decline to renew the contract when it expires in 8 months, I said calmly. "You'll need to find a new company willing to service this community. Based on the quotes I've seen from our competitors, you'll be paying at least $60,000 more per year for comparable service. That's about $300 per household annually. I'm sure everyone will be thrilled to hear they're getting a major dues increase because you couldn't stop power tripping." The room erupted. People were shouting questions, arguing with each other, demanding explanations. Bob Henderson stood up from where he'd been sitting near the front. "Patricia, just apologize," he said, and his voice carried clear exhaustion. "You took his snowblower without asking. You damaged it. You've been harassing him for years over things that don't matter. And now you're threatening to cost everyone in this neighborhood hundreds of dollars because you can't admit when you're wrong. Just apologize and drop the fines." "I will not be bullied," Patricia shouted. "The HOA has standards and rules for a reason. If we start making exceptions, everything falls apart. The exceptions are for you." Someone called out from the audience. I recognized the voice as belonging to Martha Richardson, one of the families Patricia had driven out years ago. They must have moved back to town and heard about the meeting. "You enforce rules selectively, making life miserable for anyone you don't like while ignoring your own violations." "That's not true. Your mailbox is 6 inches off center," Martha said. "I measured it last week. Your holiday lights exceeded the approved wattage limit. And your trash cans are visible from the street, which violates Section 9 of the bylaws." Other voices joined in, people listing Patricia's violations. I hadn't asked them to do this, but it seemed the neighborhood had been keeping track of her hypocrisy for a while. Patricia looked around wildly, seeing her support crumbling. The other board members were staying carefully neutral, clearly not willing to back her up. Finally, her eyes landed on me. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll fight you on this." "You'll lose," I said simply. "And in the process, you'll cost this community a lot of money and goodwill. Is your pride really worth that?" For a long moment, Patricia didn't respond. Then, to my surprise, her expression hardened into something calculating. "Fine," she said. "I'll withdraw the motion and dismiss the fines. But I'm also resigning as HOA president, effective immediately. You want to be the community hero. You deal with all the complaints and requests and problems. You'll see how thankless this job is, how no matter what you do, someone is unhappy. And when everything falls apart because people stop following rules, don't come crying to me." She grabbed her papers off the podium and walked out of the clubhouse, leaving stunned silence behind her. Bob Henderson gave me an apologetic look and hurried after her. Helen Porter, the vice president, slowly walked up to the podium. "Well," she said, "I guess I'm acting president now. Can we all agree this meeting is adjourned? I think we've had enough excitement for one night." There was scattered agreement and people started filing out. Several residents came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. Others had questions about the Alpine contract and whether I'd really let it lapse. I assured them that as long as the community treated my company with basic respect, we'd continue providing service at the discounted rate. Marcus, who'd been sitting in the back observing everything, came up as the crowd thinned. "That was intense," he said. "Think she'll actually follow through on the apology?" "Probably not," I admitted, "but at least she'll stop harassing me. And maybe the next HOA president will be more reasonable." "You know they're going to ask you to take the job," Marcus said. "You just demonstrated you can stand up to difficult situations and you have everyone's respect right now." "No way," I said firmly. "I've seen what that job does to people." Patricia wasn't always a nightmare. According to Bob, she started out genuinely wanting to help the community. But the constant complaints and petty disputes wore her down until she became the tyrant we all know. I'm not interested in that path. We walked out to the parking lot together. The night was clear and cold, stars visible overhead now that the storm had passed. The streets were perfectly plowed, neat mounds of snow marking the boundaries. It looked like a postcard of suburban winter tranquility. My phone buzzed. It was a message from the neighborhood text chain. Helen Porter had posted an announcement. "Patricia Henderson has resigned as HOA president. Elections for a new president will be held in 30 days. Nominations are now open." Within minutes, several people had nominated me. I turned off my phone without responding. The next few weeks were surreal. Patricia kept her word about dismissing the fines, though she never did issue that formal apology. Instead, She and Bob largely disappeared from community activities. I'd see them occasionally, getting into their car or checking their mail, but they stopped attending neighborhood events or participating in the text chain. The HOA board elected a new president, Frank Davidson, the former secretary. He was a retired accountant with a calm demeanor and a common-sense approach to rules enforcement. One of his first acts was to review all outstanding fines and violations, dismissing dozens of petty complaints that Patricia had levied over the years. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Without Patricia's constant oversight, people relaxed. Mailboxes drifted a few inches off their marks without anyone caring. Holiday decorations became more creative and colorful. Someone planted a vegetable garden without needing board approval. I kept my ownership of Alpine Snow Services quiet, though enough people knew that it wasn't exactly a secret anymore. We continued servicing Willowbrook Estates at the discounted rate, and the complaints to our office dropped to nearly zero. When Frank Davidson did contact us, it was with reasonable requests and polite language. About 2 months after the meeting, I got a call from Bob Henderson. "Daniel, I wanted to reach out," he said. "Patricia and I are selling the house. We've already accepted an offer and will be moving by the end of March." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was surprised to realize I meant it. "Is everything okay?" "We just need a fresh start," Bob said. "Patricia hasn't been the same since that meeting. I think she's embarrassed and hurt, and every day in this neighborhood reminds her of what happened. I tried to tell her it would blow over, that people would forget, but she won't listen. So we're moving to a condo downtown, no HOA, no neighborhood politics. It'll be better for both of us." "Bob, for what it's worth, I didn't want to humiliate her. I just wanted her to stop harassing me and other residents." "I know," Bob said. "And honestly, she needed that wake-up call. Patricia let the power go to her head and she couldn't see how much damage she was doing. Maybe this will help her reflect and change, or maybe it won't. Either way, it's not your fault." We talked for a few more minutes and then said goodbye. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that Patricia would no longer be my adversary, guilt that my actions had contributed to her leaving, and hope that maybe she'd find some peace wherever she ended up. Spring came to Buffalo with the usual dramatic transformation. Snow melted, revealing lawns that needed work and damage that needed repair. The neighborhood came together for cleanup days, people working side by side to rake and trim and plant. The atmosphere was lighter than I'd seen in years, as if Patricia's departure had lifted a weight everyone had been carrying. One Saturday in April, I was working in my front yard when a moving truck pulled up across the street. A young family emerged from a car behind it, a couple in their 30s with 2 small kids. They looked excited and slightly overwhelmed, the way all new homeowners do. I walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to Willowbrook Estates," I said, shaking hands with the husband. "I'm Daniel Jenkins. I live right across the street." "Mike Torres," he said. "This is my wife Jennifer and our kids Emma and Lucas. We're excited to be here. The neighborhood seems really nice." "It is," I said. "If you need any help moving or settling in, just let me know." "Actually," Jennifer said, "the realtor mentioned something about an HOA. We've never lived in one before. Is it pretty strict?" I thought about how to answer that. "We have an HOA," I said carefully. "They manage some common areas and handle snow removal. The rules are reasonable, and the current president is very sensible. You shouldn't have any problems as long as you maintain your property and pay your dues." "That's good to hear," Mike said. "The previous owners said the same thing. They actually said the HOA president used to be kind of intense, but things have gotten a lot better recently." "Things have definitely improved," I agreed, smiling. I helped them unload some boxes and then headed back to my own yard work. As I was raking, I thought about everything that had happened over the past few months. The blizzard, the stolen snowblower, the confrontation at the HOA meeting. It had been stressful and dramatic, but ultimately necessary. Patricia had needed to face consequences for her behavior. The neighborhood had needed to see that standing up to bullies was possible. And I had needed to stop letting people treat me like a doorway they could walk through. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey, you'll never guess what just happened," he said, excitement clear in his voice. "The Meadowview Estates HOA just called. They want to hire us for snow removal starting next season. Apparently word has gotten around about the quality of our service and our fair pricing." Meadowview, that's huge. They've got over 300 homes. 347, Marcus said. "This contract would increase our revenue by almost 20%. All because you stood up to one nightmare HOA president and showed people that Alpine is a quality operation run by people with integrity." "We've always been a quality operation," I pointed out. "Yeah, but now people know it, and they know the owners. You coming out of the shadows was the best marketing move we could have made." After we hung up, I stood in my front yard looking at my house, my neighborhood, my life. Amanda would have liked this place, I thought. Not the HOA drama, but the community that was emerging now that people felt free to be themselves. She always said that the best neighborhoods were the ones where people helped each other without keeping score, where rules existed to make life better rather than to control behavior. I thought we were getting there. That evening, I attended an informal neighborhood gathering at the community clubhouse. Frank Davidson had organized it, calling it a spring welcome party for new residents. The Torres family was there, along with 2 other families who'd recently moved in. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, people laughing and sharing stories. Helen Porter came up to me with a plate of cookies. "Daniel, I wanted to thank you again for what you did at that meeting," she said. "I know it was uncomfortable, but someone needed to stand up to Patricia. She was driving good people away and making everyone miserable." "I just did what needed to be done," I said. "Well, it made a difference. The board has been reviewing all of Patricia's policies and decisions, and we've found a lot of problematic stuff." She was essentially running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, interpreting rules however she wanted and targeting people she didn't like. "We're working on implementing better oversight and accountability measures so nothing like that happens again." "That's good to hear," I said. "An HOA should serve the community, not control it." "Exactly," Helen said. She hesitated, then added, "I heard Patricia and Bob are doing okay, by the way. A mutual friend said they seem happier in their new place. No HOA responsibilities, no neighborhood politics. Maybe it's what they needed." I nodded, genuinely glad to hear it. I hadn't wanted to ruin Patricia's life, just to stop her from ruining mine and others. If she'd found peace and happiness elsewhere, that was a better outcome than I could have hoped for. The party continued into the evening, and I found myself enjoying it more than I'd expected. These were my neighbors, my community. Flawed and complicated, but ultimately decent people trying to build good lives in a nice place. That was worth fighting for. As I walked home later, I passed by what used to be Patricia's house. The lights were on inside, and through the window, I could see the Torres family unpacking boxes. Emma, the little girl, was dancing around with what looked like a stuffed animal while her parents laughed. New beginnings. For them, for the neighborhood, for me. My phone buzzed one more time. It was a message from the neighborhood text chain, someone asking about the best local restaurants. Within minutes, people were sharing recommendations, arguing good-naturedly about pizza places and debating the merits of various wing joints. Normal neighborhood conversation, absent the tension and fear that had characterized every interaction when Patricia was in charge. I added my own recommendation, then pocketed my phone and went inside. Tomorrow I'd have work to handle, Alpine Snow Services contracts to review, and probably 100 small decisions to make about operations and staffing. But tonight, I was just a guy in his neighborhood, grateful for a problem solved and a community restored. The snowblower sat in my garage, refurbished and waiting for next winter. The scratches Patricia had left were still visible, permanent reminders of the blizzard and everything that followed. I didn't bother fixing them. Some scars are worth keeping, evidence of battles fought and lessons learned. Outside, the spring evening settled into night. Stars appeared overhead, the same stars that had watched the blizzard rage months ago. Buffalo winters were harsh and unforgiving, but they passed. They always passed. And when they did, life returned, stronger and more resilient than before. I turned off the garage light and headed inside, closing the door behind me. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities, but tonight, finally, everything was exactly as it should be.